The promotion that changed everything. Congratulations. We're promoting you to Senior Operations Manager. The words should have made me happy. After 7 years of late nights, missed holidays, and working weekends, I had finally earned the position I'd been chasing. Instead, as I stared at the email on my computer screen, I felt something I couldn't explain. A strange sense of dread. Maybe because deep down, I already knew what would happen when my family found out. And unfortunately, I was right. 3 days later, my mother insisted on having a family dinner. Everyone wants to celebrate your success, she said. At first, I believed her. I even bought a cake on the way home. The restaurant was packed with relatives. My mother hugged me. My brother clapped me on the shoulder. My sister smiled wider than I'd seen in years. For a moment, I felt appreciated. For a moment, I felt loved. Then my mother stood up and tapped her glass. The room fell silent. I just want everyone to know how proud we are of him. People applauded. I smiled awkwardly. Then she continued. And now that he's making real money, he has generously agreed to help the family even more. My smile disappeared. What? I hadn't agreed to anything. But before I could speak, my sister jumped in. Honestly, it will make such a difference. I frowned. A difference for what? My sister exchanged a quick glance with Mom. The kind of glance people share when they've already made a decision without you. Then she smiled. Well, Grandma's nursing home costs have gone up. I blinked. Okay. And Jason's private school tuition is due next month. My nephew. Still not my responsibility. And my rent has increased. I stared at her. The entire table was looking at me expectantly. Almost like they'd rehearsed this conversation beforehand. My stomach dropped. Wait, what exactly are you saying? My mother answered before anyone else could. We think it makes sense for you to cover those expenses. The room suddenly felt very small. I laughed nervously. Surely this was a joke. Nobody laughed back. That's when I realized they were serious. Dead serious. I slowly set down my fork. Mom, Grandma's nursing home costs nearly $2,000 a month. She nodded. Yes. My sister's rent is another $1,800. She nodded again. Yes. And private school tuition is over $1,000 monthly. Again. Yes. I looked around the table. Everyone seemed perfectly comfortable. Like they were discussing the weather. Not demanding half my paycheck. Finally I asked the question nobody wanted to answer. Why am I paying for all this? The silence that followed was deafening. Then my sister shrugged. And said the sentence that would change everything. We're just asking for a little help. A little help. The words echoed in my head. Nearly $5,000 every month. And she called it a little help. I looked at her for several seconds. Then at my mother. Then at everyone else sitting around the table. Nobody looked surprised. Nobody looked uncomfortable. Because this wasn't a discussion. It was an announcement. They had already spent money that wasn't theirs. My money. And they expected me to smile and hand it over. That's when I realized something terrifying. This promotion wasn't good news to them. It wasn't an achievement. It wasn't something to celebrate. It was access. Access to a larger paycheck. A larger bank account. A larger target. And suddenly, I understood why everyone had been so excited about this dinner. They weren't celebrating me. They were celebrating what they thought they could take from me. I took a slow sip of water. Then I smiled. Not because I was happy. Because I had just made a decision. A decision that would leave every single person at that table shocked. I looked directly at my sister. And calmly said, "If it's only a little help, then it shouldn't be a problem when I say no." The entire table went silent. And my mother's face instantly turned pale. The guilt trip begins. The silence after my answer was unbearable. My sister stared at me as if I had just insulted her in front of everyone. My mother's mouth opened slightly. "What do you mean, no?" she asked. I calmly put my glass down. "I mean exactly what I said." The entire table froze. My sister let out a nervous laugh. "Stop joking." "I'm not joking." Her smile vanished instantly. For years, I had watched this happen. Whenever someone in the family needed money, everyone somehow looked at me. Not my brother. Not my cousins. Not anyone else. Just me. Because I was the reliable one. The responsible one. The one who always said yes. Tonight was the first time I had ever said no. And they didn't know how to handle it. My mother leaned forward. "After everything we've done for you." There it was. The guilt trip. Right on schedule. I sighed. "What exactly have you done for me recently?" The question hit harder than I intended. My mother's face darkened. My sister immediately jumped in. "Mom sacrificed everything to raise us." I nodded. "And I'm grateful." "Then act grateful." The room became uncomfortably quiet. I could feel relatives watching every second of the conversation. Waiting to see if I'd finally give in. Like I always did. But something had changed. For the first time in years. I was tired. Tired of being everyone's solution. My brother finally spoke. "You're making this awkward." I looked at him. "Am I?" "Yeah." He folded his arms. "Family helps family." I almost laughed. Family helps family. Interesting. Because every time I needed help, nobody seemed available. 3 years ago, when my car broke down and I couldn't afford repairs, nobody offered a cent. 2 years ago, when I spent 6 weeks recovering from surgery, nobody visited me. Last Christmas, I spent the holiday alone because everyone was too busy. Yet somehow, whenever money was involved, family suddenly became very important. I looked around the table. "Tell me something." Nobody answered. I continued. "If I lost my job tomorrow, who here would cover my mortgage?" Silence. "Who would pay my bills?" Nothing. "Who would support me financially?" Not a single hand went up. Not one. The answer was written all over their faces. Nobody. Because they expected support. They never planned on giving it. My sister rolled her eyes. "That's completely different." "No. It's exactly the same." She shook her head. "You just got a huge promotion. So. You can afford it." I smiled. "And that's the problem." "What does that mean?" "It means everyone thinks my money belongs to them." Her face turned red. Then my mother said something that shocked me. Something I would never forget. "If your father were alive, he'd be ashamed of you." The words hit like a punch. The entire room went silent. Even my sister looked surprised. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. My father had died 10 years ago. And now she was using his memory to manipulate me. To get access to my paycheck. I slowly stood up. My chair scraped against the floor. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. I reached into my wallet. Pulled out cash. And placed enough money on the table to cover my meal. Then I looked directly at my mother. Her eyes narrowed. But don't ever use him to guilt me into financing other people's lives. The room froze. My sister looked horrified. My brother looked angry. My mother looked stunned. I turned toward the exit. But just before I reached the door, I heard my aunt say something quietly. She thought I couldn't hear it. She was wrong. She whispered to my mother. This wouldn't be happening if he knew the truth. I stopped walking. Every hair on my body stood up. The truth? What truth? I slowly turned around. My mother had gone completely pale. And suddenly, everyone at the table looked terrified. The secret they never wanted me to hear. I stared at my aunt. What truth? Nobody answered. My aunt immediately looked down at her plate. My mother's face lost all color. And for the first time that night, I saw fear in her eyes. Real fear. Not anger. Not disappointment. Fear. I walked back toward the table. Slowly. Deliberately. Every relative avoided eye contact. My heart started pounding. What truth? I repeated. My brother stood up. You're overreacting. I ignored him. I wasn't talking to him. I was staring directly at my mother. Mom. Nothing. Answer me. Her hands trembled. Just slightly. But I noticed. Because suddenly every tiny detail mattered. For years, I had always felt like the outsider in the family. Not completely. Just enough to notice. My brother was always the favorite. My sister could do no wrong. Meanwhile, every achievement I earned was treated like an expectation. Never celebrated. Never appreciated. I had always wondered why. Tonight, for the first time, I felt like I was standing at the edge of an answer. My aunt suddenly stood up. I should go. The panic in her voice was obvious. My mother immediately nodded. Yes, it's getting late. That was all the confirmation I needed. They were hiding something. And whatever it was big. I took out my phone. Fine. Everyone looked confused. I opened the voice recorder app. And placed the phone on the table. What are you doing? My brother snapped. Recording. His eyes widened. Why? Nobody spoke. The next 30 seconds felt like 30 years. Then my aunt made a mistake. A huge mistake. She looked directly at my mother and whispered. Years ago. Told me what? My mother suddenly burst into tears. Real tears. The kind I'd never seen from her before. And then she said 6 words that shattered my entire world. Everything stopped. The restaurant. The noise. The people. The conversation. It all disappeared. I could hear only one thing. My heartbeat. Louder. And louder. And louder. What? The word barely left my mouth. Nobody answered. My mother covered her face. My sister started crying. My brother looked away. And in that moment, I realized they all knew. Every single one of them. Except me. For 10 years after my father's death, they had all known. And nobody told me. I felt sick. Like the floor had vanished beneath my feet. Explain. My voice sounded unfamiliar. Cold. Dangerously cold. My mother shook her head. I can't. Yes, you can. More silence. Then she whispered. We were going to tell you someday. I laughed. A horrible laugh. The kind people make when they're trying not to fall apart. Someday. Nobody moved. 10 years. 10 entire years. And they chose tonight. The same night they tried turning me into the family's personal bank account. The same night they demanded my money. The same night I finally said no. That wasn't a coincidence. And suddenly, I started wondering what else they had hidden from me. Then my aunt spoke again. And this time, she revealed something even worse. Something that made my blood run cold. She looked directly at me and said, the inheritance was supposed to be yours. The room exploded into chaos. And I realized this family wasn't hiding one secret. They were hiding two. The money my father left behind. The inheritance was supposed to be yours. The words echoed through my mind. Again. And again. And again. Nobody denied it. Nobody corrected her. Nobody called her a liar. Because it was true. I slowly turned toward my mother. My voice was barely above a whisper. What inheritance? My mother started crying harder. My brother immediately stepped in. You need to calm down. I looked at him. The anger inside me exploded. Don't tell me to calm down. The entire restaurant went silent. People were staring now. I didn't care. For years, I had struggled. Worked overtime. Skipped vacations. Delayed buying a home. Lived carefully. Meanwhile my brother somehow bought a new SUV. My sister somehow never worried about money. And now, I was hearing about an inheritance nobody ever mentioned. I stared at my mother. How much? Nobody answered. I asked again. How much? My aunt finally whispered. About $300,000. My knees nearly gave out. $300,000. $300,000. Gone. Hidden. Stolen. Whatever word you wanted to use. None of them were good. I couldn't believe it. $300,000 could have changed my life. It could have paid off my mortgage. Cleared my student loans. Allowed me to start my own business. Instead, I spent years struggling. While everyone around me acted like I owed them more. Then I asked the question everyone feared. Where did it go? Silence. My brother looked away. My sister looked away. My mother cried. And suddenly, I already knew the answer. I pointed directly at my brother. You got it. His eyes widened. Then I pointed at my sister. You too. Neither denied it. Not immediately. That told me everything. Finally my brother snapped. It wasn't like that. I laughed. A bitter laugh. Then explain it. He couldn't. Because there was no explanation. Only excuses. My mother finally whispered. You didn't need it. I froze. What? She wiped tears from her face. You were responsible. I stared at her, unable to process what I just heard. She continued. Your brother needed help. I looked at my brother. The SUV. The vacations. The expensive house. Everything suddenly made sense. And my sister? My mother lowered her head. She was struggling. I felt something inside me break. Not anger. Not sadness. Trust. Years of trust. Gone. In seconds. Then my sister said the worst thing possible. The thing that ensured there would be no forgiveness. No reconciliation. No second chances. She folded her arms and said. You turned out fine without it anyway. The moment those words left her mouth, I knew exactly what I was going to do next. And for the first time all night, I smiled. They thought I would forgive them. My sister's words hung in the air. You turned out fine without it anyway. I stared at her, waiting, hoping she'd realize how awful that sounded. She didn't. Instead, she looked annoyed. Like I was the problem. Like I was overreacting. I laughed. Not because anything was funny. Because I finally understood something. These people didn't feel guilty. Not one of them. They felt entitled. Money. Time. Energy. Trust. And now that the truth was out, they expected me to simply accept it. Move on. Pretend everything was normal. I looked at my mother. Did you ever plan on telling me? She couldn't answer. That was answer enough. Then I looked at my brother. How much did you get? He crossed his arms. That's none of your business. I almost smiled. Interesting answer. Because it was literally my business. My aunt quietly spoke. Almost 200,000. The room froze. My brother glared at her. But it was too late. The truth was out. $200,000. Gone. Handed to the man who constantly lectured me about family responsibility. The same man who couldn't help me if I lost my job. The same man who expected me to pay everyone else's bills. Then my sister's amount came out. Nearly 100,000. I just sat there. Numb. $300,000. My opportunities. My security. Distributed like party favors. And nobody thought I deserved to know. My mother reached for my hand. I pulled away. Her face crumpled. Please don't do this. I looked at her. Do what? Tear this family apart. The irony almost made me laugh. I wasn't the one who lied for 10 years. I wasn't the one who hid an inheritance. I wasn't the one demanding money. Then my phone buzzed. A message. From an attorney friend. Someone I'd texted 20 minutes earlier. Someone who specialized in inheritance disputes. I opened the message. Read it. And felt my heartbeat quicken. Because according to him, there was a very real chance I could recover part of the money. Maybe even all of it. I slowly put my phone away. My brother noticed. What was that? I smiled. The first genuine smile of the evening. A smile that immediately made everyone nervous. Then I stood up, picked up my jacket, and headed for the door. My mother called after me. "Where are you going?" I stopped. Without turning around, I answered. "To find out exactly how much this family owes me." And behind me, nobody said a word. Because for the first time in their lives, they realized I wasn't asking for permission anymore. I was preparing for war. The investigation begins. The next morning, my phone exploded with messages. "Mom, please call me." "Sister, you're being ridiculous." "Brother, don't do something you'll regret." I ignored every single one. For 10 years, they had ignored the truth. They could wait one more day. Instead, I drove straight to my attorney friend's office. His name was Mark. And unlike my family, Mark didn't care about feelings. He cared about facts. I handed him every document I had. My father's old records. Bank statements. Letters. Even photos. He spent nearly an hour reviewing everything. The longer he looked, the more serious his expression became. Finally, he leaned back in his chair. "This is worse than I thought." My stomach tightened. "What do you mean?" He folded his hands. "If the information you've given me is accurate, somebody deliberately hid assets from you." The room suddenly felt colder. "Can I recover the money?" Mark didn't answer immediately. That worried me. Then he said something unexpected. "Maybe. Maybe. Not yes. Not no. Maybe. But that's not the interesting part." I frowned. "What is?" He slid a document across the desk. A document I had never seen before. A trust agreement. My eyes widened. "What is this?" Mark pointed at a name. My name. Written clearly in black ink. According to the document, a separate trust fund had been established shortly before my father's death. One that was supposed to become accessible when I turned 25. I stared at the paper. Unable to breathe. "Nobody ever told me about this." Mark nodded. "I figured." Then he pointed at another section. And everything changed. Again. The trustee responsible for protecting the fund wasn't my mother. It wasn't my brother. It wasn't my sister. It was someone else entirely. Someone I hadn't seen in years. Someone who disappeared from our lives shortly after my father's funeral. My father's younger brother. My Uncle Daniel. I sat frozen. Because suddenly a memory resurfaced. A memory I'd buried years ago. I remembered Uncle Daniel trying to talk to me after the funeral. I remembered my mother pulling me away. I remembered her saying, "He isn't part of this family anymore." At the time, I believed her. Now, I wasn't so sure. Mark tapped the document. "If this trust existed, somebody had a legal obligation to inform you." I swallowed hard. "And if they didn't?" He sighed. "Then someone may have serious problems." For the first time since the dinner, I felt something besides anger. Hope. Because maybe I wasn't crazy. Maybe I hadn't imagined years of manipulation. Maybe there was actual proof. As I left the office, my phone rang. "Mom." Again. I declined the call. 30 seconds later, she called back. Declined. Then my sister. Declined. Then my brother. Declined. A minute later, a text arrived. Mom, please don't contact Daniel. I stopped walking. My heart skipped a beat. I hadn't told anyone about the trust. I hadn't told anyone about the lawyer. I hadn't mentioned Uncle Daniel. Yet somehow, she already knew exactly where my investigation was heading. I stared at the message, reading it over and over. One sentence. One mistake. A mistake that told me everything. They were scared. Not worried. Not upset. Scared. Because there was something about Uncle Daniel they desperately didn't want me to discover. Then another message arrived. This time from an unknown number. I almost ignored it. Almost. But something made me open it. The message contained only one sentence. Your father spent his final days trying to protect you from them. My blood ran cold. Beneath the message was a name. Daniel. And then another line appeared. Meet me tonight. There's something you deserve to know. What my father knew before he died. I couldn't focus for the rest of the day. Every time I looked at my phone, I reread Daniel's message. Your father spent his final days trying to protect you from them. Protect me from them. Not from strangers. Not from criminals. My own family. The people who claimed they loved me. The people who constantly talked about loyalty and sacrifice. The same people who had hidden an inheritance for 10 years. That evening, I drove to the address Daniel had sent. A small coffee shop on the edge of town. I arrived 15 minutes early. My stomach was tied in knots. Part of me hoped this was all a misunderstanding. Part of me prayed there was some explanation that would make everything okay. Deep down, I already knew there wasn't. At exactly 7 o'clock, the door opened. A man stepped inside. Older. More gray hair. A little heavier than I remembered. But it was him. Uncle Daniel. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he smiled sadly. You look just like your father. The words hit harder than I expected. Because lately, I wasn't even sure who my father was anymore. We sat down. Daniel ordered coffee. I couldn't drink anything. My hands were shaking too much. Finally, I asked the question that had been haunting me for days. Why did everyone cut you off? Daniel stared into his coffee. Then he laughed bitterly. They told you I abandoned the family, didn't they? I nodded. That's what Mom said. Daniel smiled sadly. Of course she did. He reached into a worn leather briefcase beside him. Then he placed a thick envelope on the table. My heart immediately started racing. What is this? Proof. Inside were copies of letters. Bank records. Legal documents. Emails. And one photograph. A photograph I had never seen before. It showed my father sitting in a hospital bed. The picture had been taken just weeks before he died. And next to him stood Daniel. Then I noticed something else. My father was holding papers. Legal papers. The same trust documents Mark had shown me. Daniel pointed at the photo. That was taken 12 days before he died. I swallowed hard. He knew. Daniel nodded. He knew exactly what was about to happen. The room suddenly felt silent. Too silent. Then Daniel said something that changed everything. He knew your mother planned to give your inheritance to your brother and sister. My jaw dropped. What? He found out months before he died. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. According to Daniel, my father had accidentally discovered private conversations between my mother and my grandmother. Conversations about money. About the inheritance. About how I was responsible enough to survive without it. The exact same excuse my mother had used years later. I felt sick. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't a mistake. It was planned. Years in advance. My father had been furious. According to Daniel, he'd immediately contacted an attorney. He'd created the trust. He'd written detailed instructions. And he'd appointed Daniel as trustee. Not because Daniel wanted the job. Because he trusted him. So what happened? Daniel's face darkened. The answer came slowly. Painfully. Like he'd carried it for years. After your father died, your mother challenged everything. My heart sank. She fought the trust. Daniel nodded. For almost 2 years. The documents in front of me suddenly made sense. The missing money. The lies. The distance. The secrecy. Everything. Then Daniel opened another folder. And slid a single document toward me. A court filing. I looked down. Then froze. Because at the top of the page was my mother's signature. And beneath it. A sentence that made my blood boil. The beneficiary does not require direct access to the assets and may never be informed of their existence. I stared at those words. Again. And again. And again. My own mother had signed paperwork arguing that I should never even know the money existed. For years, I had blamed myself. Thought I wasn't successful enough. Thought I hadn't worked hard enough. Thought I was somehow behind in life. Meanwhile, the opportunities my father left for me had been stolen before I even knew they existed. Daniel looked at me carefully. Then he asked, "Do you want to know the worst part?" My stomach dropped. Worst part? He nodded. Slowly. Sadly. Then he slid one final document across the table. A bank transfer record. A very large one. Dated 6 months after my father's death. I looked at the amount. And nearly stopped breathing. Because the inheritance wasn't $300,000. Not even close. The actual amount my father left behind was $1.20 million. And suddenly, I understood why my family had been so desperate to keep me quiet. The truth about the $1.2 million. I stared at the document. $1,200,000. The number didn't seem real. My eyes kept returning to it. Again. And again. And again. Because my brain refused to accept it. For years, I thought the missing inheritance was around $300,000. That alone had felt like a betrayal. But this? This was life-changing money. I looked up at Daniel. "You're telling me Dad left me over $1 million?" Daniel nodded. Slowly. Actually, a little more than that after investments. I felt dizzy. For 10 years, I'd worked 60-hour weeks. Skipped vacations. Delayed marriage. Lived carefully. Meanwhile, the future my father had tried to secure for me had vanished. My hands trembled as I turned the pages. There were transfer records. Property purchases. Investment statements. Loan documents. The money hadn't disappeared. It had been moved. Piece by piece. Year by year. Then I saw my brother's name. Over and over. Luxury vehicle purchase. Business startup funding. Mortgage assistance. Personal loan. Debt payoff. Vacation property investment. I felt physically sick. Every time my brother had lectured me about family responsibility. He'd been living off money that was supposed to be mine. Then I found my sister's records. Rent payments. Private school tuition. Credit card settlements. Medical expenses. Home down payment assistance. Nearly every major financial problem she'd ever had been solved using money she knew wasn't hers. I looked at Daniel. They knew. He didn't answer immediately. That silence told me everything. They knew. Daniel nodded. Your brother definitely knew. I closed my eyes. The room suddenly felt too small. All those years. Every lecture. Every guilt trip. Every demand for more money. All while they were spending my inheritance behind my back. Then Daniel handed me another envelope. This arrived last week. I frowned. What is it? Something your father wrote. My heart stopped. I carefully opened it. Inside was a handwritten letter. My father's handwriting. I recognized it instantly. The moment I saw it, tears filled my eyes. Because it felt like hearing his voice again. After 10 years. The letter began. If you're reading this, then someone finally told you the truth. My vision blurred. I wiped my eyes and continued. I know your mother will try to convince you that what happened was necessary. It wasn't. My chest tightened. You were always the strongest child. That's why they'll justify taking from you. They'll say you didn't need help. They'll say you would have succeeded anyway. I froze. Because those were the exact words my mother and sister had used. Almost word for word. But strength isn't permission for people to steal from you. I felt tears running down my face. In one sentence, my father had understood something I'd spent years trying to explain. Then I reached the final paragraph. The one that changed everything. If they ever take what belongs to you, don't protect them from the consequences. I spent years doing that, and it only made things worse. I read it 3 times. Then 4. Then 5. My father had known. He had known exactly who they were. And he had spent his final days trying to protect me. I carefully folded the letter and put it back into the envelope. Then my phone rang. Mom. Again. For the 20th time. This time, I answered. The line was silent for a moment. Then she spoke. Her voice shaking. Please stop. I stared out the coffee shop window. Stop what? You've made your point. I laughed. A cold laugh. One that even surprised me. My point. Then she said something that made my blood boil. Something so unbelievable that I almost ended the call. Your brother could lose everything. I closed my eyes. There it was. Not an apology. Not regret. Not concern for me. Concern for him. Always him. I spoke calmly. Dangerously calmly. Did you ever worry about what I lost? Silence. Did you ever think about what my life would have looked like if I'd had access to my inheritance? More silence. Then she whispered. We did what we thought was best. I ended the call. Without another word. 30 seconds later, a new message appeared on my screen. This time from my brother. Only 4 words. But they changed the entire situation. Let's make a deal. I stared at the message. Then smiled. Because people only offer deals when they're scared. And for the first time in his life. My brother was terrified. My brother's deal. I stared at the message. Let's make a deal. For years, my brother had ignored my struggles. When I worked double shifts, he was on vacation. When I worried about bills, he was buying new cars. When I needed support, he always had an excuse. Now suddenly, he wanted to negotiate. I didn't reply immediately. I let him wait. 10 minutes. 20. An hour. By the time I answered, he had already sent 6 more messages. Brother, please call me. Brother, we can fix this. Brother, don't involve lawyers. Brother, please. The last message almost made me laugh. Because I couldn't remember the last time he'd ever said, please, to me. Finally, I called him. He answered before the first ring finished. Thank God. I remained silent. I know you're angry. Angry? That was an interesting word. As if this was a misunderstanding. As if somebody had forgotten my birthday. Not stolen a fortune from me. What deal? I asked. There was a pause. Then he spoke carefully. Like someone walking through a minefield. I'll sell the lake house. My eyes narrowed. The lake house. The vacation property partially purchased with my inheritance. I'll give you the money. I almost laughed. The money? Yes. How much? Another pause. 300,000. I smiled. A cold smile. Because now I knew exactly how desperate he was. You think this is about 300,000? Silence. I know about the 1.2 million. The line went dead quiet. For several seconds, I heard nothing. Then a shaky breath. Daniel told you. It wasn't a question. It was a realization. Suddenly, his confident tone disappeared. Because he understood something important. The lies were over. For years, my family controlled the story. Now they couldn't. Then my brother said something unexpected. Something I never thought I'd hear. It wasn't my idea. I closed my eyes. There it was. The blame shifting. The first stage of panic. Whose idea was it? He hesitated. Too long. Way too long. Finally he whispered. Mom's. I felt my stomach drop. Not because I was surprised. Because hearing it out loud somehow made it worse. According to him, after Dad died, Mom became obsessed with protecting my brother and sister. She convinced herself they couldn't survive without financial help. Meanwhile, I was independent. The responsible child. The reliable child. The child who would be okay. So she took from the strongest child to support the weakest ones. Over. And over. And over again. Then my brother said something that chilled me. At first, I thought she'd tell you. I froze. What? She kept saying she'd tell you when the time was right. My jaw tightened. And years passed. He sighed. Then it became impossible. Impossible. Interesting word. Because telling the truth gets harder every year you hide it. Then he added. After a while, nobody wanted you to know. That sentence hit harder than anything else. Because it wasn't just Mom. It wasn't just my sister. It wasn't just my brother. It was all of them. Every single person who knew. Every single person who stayed silent. Then I asked the question that had been bothering me since meeting Daniel. Why is everyone so scared now? Silence. Then my brother answered. And the answer changed everything. Because the inheritance wasn't the only thing hidden. My heart stopped. What does that mean? Another pause. Longer this time. Then he whispered. Dad changed his will 2 weeks before he died. I sat up straight. What? He found out what Mom was planning. My pulse began racing. And after that, my brother said quietly, he left instructions that nobody was ever supposed to see unless the trust was violated. The trust had been violated. Completely. Which meant those instructions could now be activated. I swallowed hard. What instructions? My brother's voice cracked. For the first time in my life. He sounded genuinely afraid. Then he said the words that explained why everyone was panicking. If the trust was ever stolen, Dad ordered a full forensic investigation into every family asset purchased afterward. The room felt suddenly colder. Every house. Every car. Every business. Every investment. Every bank account. Everything. And if those assets were connected to my inheritance, they could be seized. Suddenly, I understood. This wasn't about paying me back anymore. This was about survival. Because if the investigation started, my family might lose far more than money. They might lose everything. And for the first time, I realized my father may have planned for this exact moment. The secret my mother couldn't hide anymore. The moment I hung up with my brother, I called Mark. I told him everything. The trust. The letter. The hidden inheritance. And most importantly, the forensic investigation clause. There was silence on the line. Then Mark said, "If that clause is valid, your family has a serious problem." The next morning, the investigation officially began. For the first time in years, people started asking questions my family couldn't avoid. Bank transfers. Property records. Investment accounts. Business filings. Credit lines. Every financial move made after my father's death was suddenly under a microscope. And almost immediately, the cracks started showing. By the end of the week, my brother called me 12 times. My sister called 8. Mom called 17. I answered none of them. Then something happened that nobody expected. My sister showed up at my house. Unannounced. When I opened the door, she looked exhausted. Her eyes were red. Like she hadn't slept in days. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she whispered, "Please stop this." I laughed bitterly. The same people who never stopped taking from me suddenly wanted mercy. What exactly am I stopping? She looked away. The investigation. I folded my arms. Why? She hesitated. Then she said something strange. Something that immediately got my attention. Because Mom is hiding something. My heart skipped a beat. Hiding what? My sister shook her head. I don't know. That answer sounded honest. For the first time in years. Then she said. But whatever it is, she's more scared of that than losing the money. I stared at her. Because money was already ruining the family. So what could possibly be worse? Before leaving, my sister handed me an old envelope. Yellowed with age. The edges worn. Mom kept this locked away. She swallowed hard. I found it yesterday. Then she walked away. Leaving me alone with the envelope. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside was a single letter. Written by my father. But unlike the last letter, this one had never been sent. At the top of the page were 6 words. If anything happens to me. My pulse quickened. I continued reading. The letter explained that my father had become increasingly worried during the final months of his life. Not about his health. About his family. Specifically. About my mother. According to the letter, Dad had discovered financial transactions he couldn't explain. Money disappearing from accounts. Loans taken out without his knowledge. Documents altered. Signatures that looked suspicious. At first, he assumed they were mistakes. Then he started investigating. What he found terrified him. Near the bottom of the letter, one sentence had been underlined twice. I stared at it. Reading it over and over. Unable to believe it. I no longer believe your mother acted alone. My stomach dropped. Not alone. Meaning someone else was involved. Someone who helped hide the money. Someone who helped carry out the plan. Suddenly, a memory surfaced. A person who always seemed present whenever finances were discussed. A person my mother trusted completely. A person who disappeared shortly after Dad died. Grandma. The same grandmother whose nursing home bills everyone expected me to pay. The same grandmother who always defended my mother. The same grandmother who never once questioned where the inheritance went. Then my phone rang. It was Daniel. The moment I answered, he spoke quickly. Urgently. You need to get to the nursing home. My heart started racing. What happened? Daniel's voice sounded shaken. Your grandmother just asked for you. I frowned. Why now? Then Daniel said something that made my blood run cold. Because she says she wants to confess before she dies. And suddenly, the biggest secret in the family was finally about to come out. Grandma's confession. The drive to the nursing home felt endless. Every red light seemed to last forever. Every minute felt like an hour. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white. One thought kept repeating in my mind. What could possibly be worse than everything I'd already learned? When I arrived, Daniel was waiting outside. His face was pale. More serious than I'd ever seen him. That alone terrified me. How is she? I asked. Daniel sighed. Not good. My stomach dropped. Without another word, he led me through the building. Past nurses. Past patients. Past families saying their goodbyes. Until we reached room 214. The door was partially open. Inside sat my mother. My sister. My brother. And my grandmother. For the first time in my life. Grandma looked small. Weak. Fragile. The woman who had always controlled every room she entered suddenly looked like she was carrying the weight of a lifetime. The moment she saw me, tears filled her eyes. Real tears. Not manipulation. Not guilt. Regret. Please come closer. Her voice was barely a whisper. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. The entire room felt frozen. I slowly walked to her bedside. My mother immediately stood up. Almost panicked. "Mom, you don't have to do this." Grandma ignored her. That was the first sign. Because my grandmother had never ignored my mother before. Not once. Then Grandma looked directly at me. And said the words I'd been waiting years to hear. "I'm sorry." Silence. Nobody cried. Nobody interrupted. Nobody even breathed. Because everyone knew what those words meant. For years, nobody had apologized. Nobody had admitted anything. Nobody had accepted responsibility. Now finally, someone was. My grandmother reached for my hand. Her fingers trembled. The money. She paused. Fighting for breath. The inheritance. Another pause. Then she closed her eyes. As if gathering strength. When she spoke again, everything changed. It was my idea. The room exploded. "What?" my sister shouted. My brother stood up so fast his chair nearly fell over. My mother started crying immediately. But Grandma wasn't finished. For years, I had believed my mother was the mastermind. According to Grandma, she wasn't. The plan started with Grandma. After Dad got sick, Grandma became convinced that I would succeed no matter what. She called me the strong one. The smart one. The survivor. Meanwhile, she worried constantly about my brother and sister. One struggled with debt. The other couldn't keep a job. Grandma believed they needed the inheritance more than I did. So she started planting ideas in Mom's head. Month after month. Year after year. Eventually, Mom gave in. I looked at my mother. Tears streamed down her face. For once, she wasn't defending herself. Because she couldn't. The truth was finally out. Then Grandma said something nobody expected. It wasn't just the inheritance. The room went silent again. "What do you mean?" I asked. Grandma's eyes filled with tears. Then she whispered. "Your father found out because I made a mistake." My pulse quickened. "What mistake?" Grandma looked at me. And for the first time, I saw genuine fear. Then she said, "The money wasn't the only thing we tried to take from you." My heart nearly stopped. "What?" Grandma closed her eyes. "Your father discovered we were trying to remove you from the will completely." The room went silent. Dead silent. Even my mother looked shocked. As if hearing it spoken aloud made it real. According to Grandma, before Dad created the trust, there had been discussions. Private discussions. Discussions about cutting me out entirely. Not reducing my share. Not delaying it. Removing me completely. Because they believed I didn't need it. I couldn't breathe. For years, I'd thought they stole money. Now I was learning they'd originally planned to erase me completely. Then Grandma grabbed my hand tighter. And whispered one final sentence. A sentence that sent a chill through the entire room. But your father discovered something else before he died. I leaned closer. What? Grandma's voice cracked. Then she said. Someone forged documents in his name. The room froze. Because inheritance theft was one thing. Forgery was another. And suddenly, what started as a family betrayal was beginning to sound like a crime. Grandma started crying. My mother buried her face in her hands. My brother looked like he might be sick. And for the first time, I realized this story was far from over. Because now there was only one question left. Who forged my father's signature? The forged signature. Nobody spoke for several seconds after Grandma's confession. The room felt frozen. My mother's eyes were fixed on the floor. My brother looked pale. My sister looked completely lost. And Grandma looked exhausted. Like she had spent years carrying a secret she could no longer hold. I swallowed hard. Who forged the documents? Grandma closed her eyes. For a moment, I thought she wasn't going to answer. Then she whispered. I don't know. The room erupted. What do you mean you don't know? My brother snapped. Grandma looked at him. I know someone did it. But not who. She slowly shook her head. I wasn't convinced. Something felt wrong. People don't accidentally discover forged documents without learning who created them. Then Daniel stepped forward. For the first time since arriving, he spoke. And when he did, everyone listened. Actually, he looked directly at my mother. I think she knows. The room went dead silent. My mother immediately stood up. No. Her answer came too quickly. Way too quickly. Daniel didn't back down. For years he'd remained quiet. Now he wasn't. You knew there were documents with your husband's signature that he never signed. Mom started crying. Daniel continued. You knew because he confronted you about them. I felt my stomach twist. What documents? Daniel reached into his briefcase. The same briefcase he'd been carrying since this nightmare began. Then he pulled out a folder. A thick folder. Inside were copies of financial records. Legal amendments. Property authorizations. Bank transfer approvals. Every single one carried my father's signature. And every single one had one problem. Dad had been in the hospital when they were supposedly signed. I stared at the papers. Unable to believe what I was seeing. The dates matched. The evidence matched. Everything matched. Someone had forged his signature after he became too weak to manage his affairs. My father hadn't just been betrayed after his death. He'd been betrayed while he was still alive. Then something unexpected happened. My sister started crying. Hard. At first, nobody understood why. Then she looked at Mom. And said. Tell him. Mom didn't respond. Tell him the truth. My pulse quickened. What truth? My sister looked like she was about to fall apart. Then she said something that changed everything. I saw it. The room froze. What? I saw who signed the papers. My heart started pounding. For years she'd said nothing. For years she'd hidden it. For years she'd watched the lie grow bigger and bigger. Now finally, she was talking. The entire room stared at her. Waiting. Then she whispered. It was Grandpa. Silence. Absolute silence. My grandfather had died years earlier. A respected businessman. The family patriarch. The man everyone admired. The last person anyone would suspect. I couldn't process it. Grandpa forged Dad's signature. My sister nodded. Tears streamed down her face. I was 13. She wiped her eyes. I walked into the study. Nobody moved. Nobody blinked. The room belonged entirely to her now. He didn't see me. Her voice shook. He was copying Dad's signature from old documents. My stomach dropped. I asked what he was doing. Another pause. He told me it was family business. I felt sick. Mom. Grandma. My brother. But behind the scenes, the family's most trusted figure had been manipulating everything. Then my sister said something even worse. Mom found out later. I slowly turned toward Mom. She broke down instantly. Because she couldn't deny it. Not anymore. For years she'd protected the lie. Not because she created it. Because she was terrified of exposing it. Then Daniel opened one final document. A letter. Written by my father shortly before his death. A letter nobody had ever seen. At the bottom was one handwritten sentence. If you're reading this, then I was right about who betrayed me. My heart stopped. Because beneath that sentence, Dad had written a name. A single name. The name of the person he believed orchestrated everything. Slowly, Daniel turned the page around. Everyone looked. Mom. My brother. My sister. Me. And the moment we saw the name, Mom started sobbing. Because Dad had known the truth all along. The name written on the page was Margaret. My grandmother. And suddenly, everything came full circle. The inheritance. The forgery. The lies. The manipulation. The guilt. The stolen future. It all started with one person. The woman lying in the hospital bed. The woman who had just confessed. And for the first time in over a decade, the entire truth was finally in the open. The choice that changed everything. 3 months later, the courtroom was silent. The kind of silence that only exists when everyone already knows what's coming. My family sat on one side. I sat on the other. For the first time in my life, nobody expected me to save them. The forensic investigation had uncovered everything. Every transfer. Every forged document. Every hidden account. Every property purchased using money that should never have left the trust. The paper trail stretched back more than a decade. And it was impossible to explain away. The investigation confirmed what Dad had suspected before he died. The inheritance hadn't been mismanaged. It had been systematically diverted. Piece by piece. Year by year. When the findings became public, everything changed. My brother lost his business. Investors pulled out. Banks started asking questions. People who once praised him suddenly wanted answers. My sister's situation wasn't much better. The private school payments. The housing assistance. The debts quietly paid off over the years. All of it was exposed. And Mom. Mom looked 20 years older. The woman who had spent years defending the lies now spent her days answering for them. Grandma never left the nursing home. A week after her confession, she passed away peacefully. Her final words to me were simple. I was wrong. For years, I imagined hearing an apology. When it finally came, it didn't feel the way I expected. Some wounds are too deep for a single sentence. Then came the court's decision. The moment everyone feared. The moment everyone had been waiting for. The judge ruled that a substantial portion of the inheritance and related assets had to be returned. Not everything could be recovered. Some money was gone forever. Spent years ago. But enough remained. Enough to make things right. Or as right as they could ever be. When the hearing ended, my brother approached me. For the first time in months. For the first time without anger. Without excuses. Without demands. He looked broken. Honestly broken. I'm sorry. I studied his face. Trying to decide if I believed him. Maybe he meant it. Maybe he didn't. At that point, it almost didn't matter. Because the apology wasn't what I'd spent years wanting. The truth was. And now I finally had it. Then my sister approached. Tears filled her eyes. I nodded. Yes. Nothing more needed to be said. Finally. Mom walked toward me. Slowly. Carefully. Like she wasn't sure I would stay. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then she handed me something. A small envelope. Inside was a photograph. One I'd never seen before. It showed Dad standing beside me when I was a child. His arm around my shoulder. Both of us smiling. On the back, in Dad's handwriting, was a message. Never let anyone convince you that your worth comes from what you can give them. I stared at the words for a long time. Because for years. That's exactly what had happened. I became the reliable one. The responsible one. The provider. The fixer. The person everyone depended on. And somewhere along the way, people stopped seeing me as a son. A brother. A person. They started seeing me as a resource. Mom's voice trembled. Can you ever forgive me? The question hung in the air. Heavy. Painful. Complicated. I thought about the lies. The stolen years. The inheritance. The betrayal. The secrets. Then I thought about Dad. About his letters. About what he tried to protect. Finally, I answered. I forgive you. Mom immediately broke down crying. But before she could speak, I continued. Forgiveness doesn't mean things go back to the way they were. Her face fell. Because she understood. Some bridges can be repaired. Others can only be crossed one last time. I wasn't carrying hatred anymore. But I wasn't going back either. For the first time in my life, I chose myself. A year later, I sold my old house. Started my own company. Moved to a new city. Built a life that belonged to me. Not my family. Not their expectations. Mine. And every now and then, when I think about everything that happened, I remember Dad's words. Strength isn't permission for people to steal from you. For years, I thought being strong meant sacrificing everything. Now I know better. Sometimes being strong means saying one simple word. The word that changed my life. The word that started this entire story. No. The end, Red Heart. Fire moral of the story: the people who call you